that realization of how intensely biased the creative system was for me became very fundamental to me. And I remember everything I did from that point onwards dealt with Black identity. As much as I am trying to understand myself, I don't understand myself yet, but I know I'm somebody. Is this what everyone thinks in this circle? Do people really not think that I belong here? Are they then going to say, if it wasn't for us, you wouldn't have this book? And it absolutely crushed. Because you know when someone affirms your fear, when someone affirms your insecurity.
Welcome to the Listen to Your Footsteps podcast. I'm your host, Kojo Baffoe. In this podcast, I speak to Africans from across a multitude of sectors, including business, art, culture, media, design, technology, advertising, and everything in between, delving into their journeys and reflecting on the lessons they have learned along the way. It's about gaining insight into why and how they do what they do. These conversations offer a treasure trove of takeaways on a wide range of topics, including craft, relationships, wellness, parenting, entrepreneurship, and much more. So my guest today is Vusumzi Ngxande, a graphic designer, writer, photographer, creator and host of the Journey Kwantu podcast, and soon to be published author of Journey Kwantu the book. Is that correct?
Yes. The correction would be on the name. The name is Vusumzi.
Vusumzi, yes.
Yes.
So that's why, so to be honest,
yes,
that's why I just said Vus.
Yes.
Because, and your handles are just Vus.
Yes.
Which indicates that it is a thing.
Yes.
Because your name is Vusumzi.
Yes.
Instinctively, if somebody wants to go Vusi.
Yes.
So let's actually get into that as a start.
Sure. The name. Okay, tell me what you want to know.
No, the name. Just tell me about the name.
The name change. It is a name change.
Is it a name change? Okay.
It's a name change. I was, as you say, my handle is Just Vus on a lot of things.
Yeah.
Even my email address is Just Vus. Because in high school, I decided that my name is Vus, as in VUS, not VUSI, which is how it's generally written and pronounced. And I remember the day, I think I was in grade 11. I was in standard 9 when I made this. We had they were writing a list. And I just literally remembered this. They were writing a list of, in high school, they would make lists. The kids would make lists like, who's the hottest person? Most likely to succeed, this and this. I don't remember which list I was on. I think nerd, right? And I was asked, I don't know. I had to write my name. And I decided that I'm writing my name without an I. Because I felt that I wanted my name to be different. And I became very, very sensitive about how you pronounced my name. And people were like, oh, Vus. I'm like, no, it's Vus. What do you mean? It's Vus. I'm like, no. Even when you write it, I always have to correct people. And that was, for me, a unique identity. I like the visual look of a 3-letter name, right? And maybe that was the creative part in me. I embraced my full name, I want to say 2 years ago. Where I said, okay, this is actually my name. I want my full name. And it was after a lot of learning about culture, about learning about belonging, and learning about how do I perceive myself, right? So I shortened my name because it looked cool and it sounded cool. I had no connection to what my name meant, right? My name has a meaning, but because of how I grew up technically Xhosa, but I grew up in Joburg. There's nothing Xhosa about my family at all. Like my father couldn't even speak the language, And because of that, I didn't have any kind of relation to the name. It was just the name. And I think for the most part, I actually didn't even like it because I think it was in the 90s when every character on every show was Vus. Like literally like generations, you name it, it was there. And I remember resenting, and I'm like, did we run out of names? Like was there a time when we were like, we have like 10 names? There's a Tepo, there's a Vus, there's a Tabo, there's a Lerato, there's a, you know what I mean? I felt like I come, until I got into my podcast and started doing a lot of research, especially when I got to the part when I started researching surnames, right? And started understanding what the cultural contexts were. So the changing point for me came when, first, I have to give context into my family. I'm the only person with my surname in my family, right? My grandfather came from the Northern Cape. He came to Gauteng, and he had my father and his siblings, right? In the 30s, right? That's when my father was born. And then after he had those kids, he left, right? I think my father was around about 8 when his father left. And for reasons I'll never really know, all my father's siblings passed away when they were kids, all 6 of them, right? So when my grandfather came, he came alone. He was like a, Rolling Stone kind of a thing. No one knew much about him. When he came, had kids. And then when he left, my father, there was no connection to any kind of family, So you can understand that it meant that my father didn't have uncles.
Yeah. He
didn't have aunts. He didn't have grandfather. He didn't have a family unit on his paternal side, right? So when I came along, my father was the only person of his surname in all that he knew at the time. You know what I mean? Because he did manage to have his father's surname, but then his father left. And then he had no siblings, and he had no uncles. He had no relatives on his father's side, And because all his siblings passed away, he had no nephews and nieces and, and things like that. So as I grew up, it was me and my father who had the surname, right? And then my father passed away 2008, and then I was alone, right? And as I am learning about this history that my father lived through, I started reflecting on my name, Vusumzi. Vusumzi means to wake the family, or to what can I say, to raise the family, almost in a, not as in to raise children, but to raise something from the ground, right? And then it dawned on me what my name meant. I was the last of my surname. So the next thing to do is to Vusumzi, to raise this lineage afresh, anew. You know what I mean? And then it dawned on me that my name was actually prophetic. I don't know to what extent my father knew why he named me that, but it came to me that this was actually an instruction, not just a name. This was, in many ways, this was a calling. And I had to also understand what having that particular surname meant. So meaning that because now I'm isolated with a surname, there's no one in the family. I hardly know any relatives with the surname, meaning that I have to give this surname an identity. I have to give it body. I have to give it life, and I have to do it in a very conscious and intentional way. So then at that point, I was like, okay, this is what my name means. And this is actually a crucially important part of who I am. So Vusumzi Ngxande is a prophecy. It's a calling for me. This name, I remember my son kept complaining about his name when he was still young. He's like, my name is too long. I'm like, no, it's not too long. It's big. You have a very big name. And that's also what I realized, that when I reverted back to my name, to my full name, that, okay, this name is big, but I sort of then grew into it.
So I've always been fascinated by let's say names, but from an African perspective. because our names do mean something.
Yes.
And even Tsepo and Tabang and Vusi, all of those names have a meaning behind them. Whereas from a Western perspective, of like European perspective, it's not as common. And kind of coming to South Africa, where in the transition from kind of apartheid to let's call it the dispensation or new dispensation that we're in, it's watching people go through the process of what you're talking about.
Yes.
Not everybody does it, but in one form or another, is people kind of going through the transition and recognizing the power of their names. Whereas, so my name Kojo is it's a relatively common name if you go to Ghana. Like I grew up in an environment where it's unique.
Yes.
But there's a whole process. There's a whole naming ceremony attached to it. It signifies the day of the week I was born. And then here people go, oh, so it means Monday, and it's like no. It means I was born on a Monday, but it's also that's the day my soul decided to arrive. So it's like your parents will give you names, but that name the soul is actually choosing that name. And so, like I said, I mean, it's fascinating to hear that story because it's something that I hope for people, especially within this environment. It's kind of go through that journey, find yourself, and find that identity. And when you talk about your son, he's also going to go through that journey, and wherever he ends up, he ends up. I had a younger brother who, for a long time, because we all have Ghanaian names, and then growing up in Lesotho, and he bristled against his name because it was like, Basotho were living in the country, but our names sound different. Our names sound they're from somewhere else.
Yeah, and it's like, alien,
and I belong, like we didn't grow up in Ghana, so it's like I belong here. Why can't my name be something that belongs in the same space?
You know what's interesting? There are certain cultures, I could be wrong, but I think it's Bapedi, where there can be signs that you've given a child the wrong name. So if a child cries a lot, after they've been named and stuff, they become like problematic. They have like colic and things like that. There are instances where they will say that is because the child does not want the name that you've given them, in that the soul that has come is rejecting that name. I think in some instances that's when they would infer that the person who has come back wants their name. If it was, grandfather so-and-so, he has come back and he doesn't want the name, Or sometimes it could be that they would say that you're taking too long to give the child a name. And because of that, the child is struggling to stay here. They're struggling. They don't have an anchor to be here. And if you don't name them, they will leave. So it's important to go through a particular process. But obviously, those rituals and ceremonies happen at a particular time. But there is a lot of context in which names are very strong in determining how a person actually enters this world.
Sure.
Yeah.
At what stage did this journey start for you? So, at what age did that curiosity start in terms of, for example, African spirituality, our names, culture, all of these things, even kind of recognizing, well, like let's say the before and after of bringing your name down to just 3 letters. You've talked a bit about that transition later on, but what what were you like? How did you perceive yourself before that moment of going, actually, it's Vus?
I remember in varsity, so I studied graphic design. I remember in varsity, I had this project where I was designing a layout, a magazine layout, and you could choose any topic really. And I studied in Cape Town, right? So when you're from Joburg and you go to study in Cape Town, or probably even in the Eastern Cape, and your name is Vusumzi Ngxande, and the Xhosa people are like, what kind of a Xhosa are you? You have a funny accent, and why don't you know this and why don't you know that? I spent a lot of time defending my non-Xhosaness to Xhosa people, because, they're very Xhosa people in Cape Town and in Eastern Cape, I think a lot like Zulu people in KZN. They're very territorial about their identity,
But they're also very rooted. So even if they leave Western Cape or Eastern Cape, if you come to Joburg, I mean, I was at something, prayer meeting recently, and it's Xhosa people, and like it doesn't matter where you go. It could be in Bryanston. I mean, I was in Gqeberha in December for Mgidi. Whether I'm in Bryanston or I'm in Gqeberha, like there's that, they're very connected to the root.
Yes. So if they come across you and you are not connected to the root, it becomes a problem, right? So you are always sort of seem weird, and there's a very palpable, I want to say almost confrontational nature in the tension that you have. It's like, you're not legit, and we would have long arguments, addressed for a long time about, but you're not Xhosa, you're not this. And I remember saying, I did not choose where I grew up, the same as you didn't choose where you grew up, and those arguments led me to deeply resent being Xhosa, deeply. You know what I mean? So back to this project that I had at school, right? So we had to do a layout. It was like a 6-pager thing. And the headline of it was, is it podcast I can swear, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't normally swear, but at that time I was very angry. So the headline of the article was, I'm not Xhosa, I'm the fucking future. Right? And I had this whole thing where there was this individual who was going through initiation, but it looks like it was futuristic in the spaceship and things like that. And for me, it was at the point where I started paying attention to identity politics, And I remember there was a particular day, a very dark moment when we were at Rez, where a fight broke out between two groups. It was a couple of Xhosa guys and a couple of Tsonga guys, right? And it was literally a culture clash, like in the most literal. It was a violent culture clash. It started in a very stupid way. I remember it was a Saturday night, and if you've been to Reds, you know what happens on Saturday nights. Somebody bumped somebody on the passage, and next thing we know, you get into the lift and there's blood all over the lift. Right. You go into the kitchen, there were kitchen knives out. There were people hospitalized in this. It was brutal and funny because at one point, one guy had another guy's head in the oven. He's trying to turn on the oven and he's trying to shove his head. The police came. But for me, it was a very pivotal moment because I remember then the res manager decided that we're going to actually have a sit down. And he was like, okay, let's talk, And I remember being in that meeting, reflecting on it and like, what is it that we're actually fighting about, And from that point onwards, situations like that, my work started to shift a lot towards identity, towards history, towards who we actually are as a people, right? So it wasn't a thing that I'm interested in this because I'm interested, I love history and whatever. It was just the process of, I don't understand this thing. And more than anything, I don't understand myself. I don't know where I fit in. You know, I'm this Xhosa kid who grew up in this Tswana home in this Tswana township in Joburg. I'm in this Cape Town, which has its own dynamics. And I'm like, okay, I don't have a place. But in the article, the imaginary article that I was writing was, I do believe that there are more people like me, or there will be more people like me in the future than like anyone else. We will become increasingly less rooted in our culture, and we will be increasingly more blended, if I can put it that way, the way that I was.
So, I mean, you're sparking so many things because, so first of all, it's interesting to hear that perspective because you're like diaspora in your own country.
Yes.
Right. So a lot of what you're grappling and a lot of what you're talking about is what those of us who are first generation, second generation, whatever, grapple with. So when I go to Ghana, you know, I'm first generation. So my father left Ghana. So when I go to Ghana, it's like it's hard to fit in because I'll never be Ghanaian enough. And like, for example, South Africa, and particularly in the Eastern Cape, there was significant Ghanaian communities. And you have children who grew up.
Really?
Yeah. You have children who grew up and they're South African and they're Ghanaian. But you're never South African enough and you're never Ghanaian enough. And so it's a constant struggle to figure out where you belong. So those are the things I grappled with. But it kind of makes sense because I didn't grow up in any of the countries that kind of where my heritage is. So hearing you talk about it, it's like, I was just like, yep, it's like being first generation diaspora, but in your own country, which is unique in itself. But at the same time, so when I was in magazine, especially Destiny Man, which was, you know, kind of a particular time in the country's history, I went into it with a very, very particular perspective. And the person that introduced us, which is George, him and I used to have long-running arguments because his whole thing was there are not enough publications for Black men, blah, blah, blah. And we used to have these conversations. And for me, one of the biggest challenges was broader society, because it's still influenced primarily by a Western perspective. When it comes to Black or African, there's no nuance. So with white, there's nuance. You know, it's English speaking, Afrikaans speaking, urban, rural. You know, where do you hang out? Are you artsy? Are you this? Are you straight? Are you gay? Are you queer? Like all of those things will be taken in consideration in the media. But when it came to Black, it was just like, okay, Black man, these are the things. And I used to argue that there's so much nuance even within that.
That's so true.
So the way you described it, like, you know, Tswana Township, Joburg, Xhosa, let's say heritage, going to UCT and all the other influences. That means if I'm creating a story that I hope to resonate with you, I can't just go, he's a Black Xhosa man. Because it's going to miss the mark. And that's what's happened in the media in this country for many years. Because the people creating the stories don't understand that there's nuance between, you know, Tsonga and Xhosa. even Botswana and Basotho.
Yes.
And our languages
and even Basotho within Basotho.
And within Basotho.
Yes.
So it's just like when you're describing, I'm just like, yeah, it must be maybe because I've gotten used to my journey. It must be hectic just trying to figure out being a diaspora in your own country.
Yeah. I can tell you another complication that I was facing at that time was, so I go to, by the way, I didn't go to UCT. We do not have UCT money at home. Okay. So I went to what was then Cape Tech, right? So I studied graphic design. Then you get into graphic design, and let's say out of a class of like maybe 40 first years, there's like 5 black people, right? And you realize that everyone that you're studying with did art at school. All I can do, I can draw. I can use a pencil. I can use a pen. Right? These people did art. They did fine art. They did art history, you know. And now you are in this minority again. Now you are a minority within a minority because now you're a black creative in graphic design. You know, I remember when I told my parents what I want to do, they're like, cartoons? Who's going to hire you for Popeye? Who's going to hire you for doing Popeye? And I remember it caused such a rift in my family to the extent where they weren't able to pay for my tertiary. And I said to them, if I get a bursary, if I can get to varsity without you paying for it, I'm going to study whatever I want to study because it's not your money. And I think they didn't have a choice at that point. You know, that's why.
Why graphic design?
I have
what was it?
No idea. You know what it was, right? So the plan was to study marketing. Why? Because my friends wanted to do marketing, right? Everybody wanted to do marketing. Me and my friends were going to do PR. We're going to go to Pretoria. And I remember it was late in December in matric. And I remember I went to the school in town. And the teacher was asking, so you guys, what are you going to do in school next year and whatever. And then I remember this white girl, she was one of a pair of twins. And she was like, I'm going to do graphic design. And they're like, oh, what's that? And it's like, well, it's in advertising and we draw stuff. And then the teacher's like, what are you going to do? I'm like, I'm going to do what she's going to do. I had no idea. Absolutely no idea what graphic design was at the time. And I paid hard for not knowing. Because you get to varsity, and it's like I didn't understand what a concept was, right? And this is part now of being a minority within a minority, and I suppose in being a diaspora within your own community, in that you lack the language to express who you are. You know what I mean? That was a challenge. And I think
there's that part, and you're still trying to figure out who you are.
Yes.
So it's constantly shifting, because even if you get the language, this is also still in flux.
Yeah.
Like until you figure out who you are, you need to actually figure out who you are, and then look at the language. But because you're doing everything simultaneously, I can imagine it being just in constant flux.
A lot. And I remember one of the most important points of my schooling at that time was we had this project that we had to do. We had to do some branding. It was a CSR, community charity project it was like a real life project that we were doing at the time. We had to do marketing and branding for this particular. It was an orphanage in Khayelitsha. The time in Cape Town, right? So then we were put into groups. I think by this time we were in third year, and there was about 4 black people left at the time. We started out around 6, 7, and then we obviously over time the classes shrink, and then by the time we were about 4 black people, and it was me, Buntu, and Papi, a friend of mine, and Tatenda, and I remember. We became a group, you know what I mean? And we're dealing with, a township situation. And we did the thing. And then there were probably like 5 or 6 other groups. Yeah, maybe about 5 groups. And I remember we did the thing. And then we got the lowest mark out of everyone, right? That shook me to my core. I was like, me, as a township black person, got lower marks than kid who've never even set foot in a township. You want to tell me they understand the township better than we do? And for me, then that's where the whole teaching fraternity then came apparent to me, that what it is that I was actually in. Like, okay, I am in this system that cannot understand me. And I was like, okay, I'm not saying that we're the best designers or this is going to be, but you can't tell me we got the lowest mark, surely. And I was like, but then you look at the lecturers.
Because so everybody's looking at it from the outside in.
Do you know what I mean?
And you are going, you guys as a group are going, oh, great. Like, our superpower is that we have an in. So we're going to look at it from the inside.
This is us.
Yeah, we're going to look at it from the inside and interpret, and using the tools that they've taught us, interpret this thing.
Yes.
But like you're saying, the entire system is geared towards an outside-in perspective.
And the fundamental issue was we had created a campaign about black people for black people. These were like, the marketing was going into the townships. These were billboards that were going to the taxi ranks. You know what I mean? To anything around that area. It was not going to Sandton. It was not going to Camps Bay. You know what I mean? So I was like, okay, I don't get this. And for me, that became a fundamental shift in how I approached my creative work from that point onwards. I remember as a point of rebellion, when we did another project, me and the group, or a part of the issue that they had was, we got so angry that when we redid the project, we did the whole thing in Xhosa. You know, like all the billboards, and we didn't translate. We're like, okay, this is what this thing says, this is what this thing says in Xhosa. And they were like, no, you can't do that. And I'm like, but you're not the target market. You don't have to understand. You know what I mean? It got to the point that they had to get an outside moderator to come assess our project, you know, so that they can determine whether or not, you know. And that realization of how intensely biased the creative system was for me became very fundamental to me, you know. And I remember everything I did from that point onwards dealt with identity, dealt with black identity, you know. And I was like, as much as I am trying to understand myself, I don't understand myself yet, but I know I'm somebody. You know what I mean? And these lecturers don't recognize that. You know, and I think one of the best advice I ever got was from one of the few colored lecturers in the university at the time. And then, because I was angry, I became this, you become this angry thing. Then that's when you hit the poetry streets, right? That's when you start, right? That's when you start you do the poetry scene.
I got into poetry because of my girlfriend, bro.
Okay.
You may have come to it with anger. I came to it with the love.
Burn the system down. Burn it all the way down. That's how I got into the whole poetry thing. You know, you get this rebellious streak. I remember I had this Che Guevara t-shirt, you know, and then it was like I had this military backpack. I was like, became very militant about my whole identity, you know. But I think over time, that rebellion became a way in which I started navigating the world more, not necessarily rebelling, but confronting a lot. You know? So I started then confronting a lot of the issues around identity, around all of those things. And I think most importantly for me was, as a creative, how do I engage with this? Because I can't engage with, I'm not a politician, I'm not a business person, I'm not this, I'm a creative. How then do I engage with it?
So my father, when I was young and rebellious, my father always used to say, you know, sometimes to break down a system, you need to kind of step in it a bit and understand how it works. Because if you're standing outside the wall and you're hammering the wall with your hands, all you're going to end up with is bloody hands. Because the wall is, you know, it's built solid. But sometimes you need to enter the system and start to see where the cracks are. where the plaster is not quite as solid, and start to dismantle it that way. And when I was younger, I didn't get that. As I've grown older, I've come to see that as a strategy, and I've implemented it. I'm not going to talk about the instances, but I've implemented it in very interesting ways as kind of partially experiments, where, for example, joining kind of like a small organization, a small grouping of people, and finding people who have been there for years, and the people who say, no, this is how we do it, this is how we've always done it, and then getting into the system, and then spending 6 months watching how everything works, and then spending a year very strategically and very quietly dismantling stuff.
Yeah.
That when the people realize what you have done, it's already too late. So yeah, my militant phase wasn't as extreme as yours, but also I guess because I talk about this often, I was raised with a lot of that thinking already from a very young age. So I mean, as 11, 12-year-old, I was fascinated by Malcolm X, and I'd read, because my father had the book in the house. I was fascinated by the Black Panther Party. I grew up with Castro, Guevara, Nkrumah, Lumumba. Like, the books were in the house. It wasn't, I'd never heard of these people. I didn't know anything about them. The books were in the house. And when I went to university, I did my last third year, because one of my majors in economics. I did development economics and radical economics, which covered Marxism and stuff. My father taught development economics till I was 13, 14. So the textbooks, the garage,
you were immersed in
our garage was converted into my father's study when we first moved into the house when I was 11 years old. And my father had textbooks. I mean, I've still got all those books in storage in Lesotho. So I could just walk in and, pull a Reader's Digest off, and then pull a Nancy Drew or Hardy Boys off, or fairy tales from Disney, and pull Nkrumah's biography. The CIA in Africa, he had these two big volumes. So
you were hardcore as a kid, hey?
So for me, it wasn't. It just was.
Yeah.
When you talk about the poetry scene, when I got into the poetry scene, and because I got in early, there was an era where it was like, you weren't legit if you hadn't read ... Have you read Fanon? Have you read this person? Have you read Chinua Achebe, Things Fall Apart? Have you read this? Have you read that? And those were all books that were at home. So the ones I had read was because I was interested in it. And there were ones that I hadn't read because even if it was there, all the times I picked it up, I was just like, okay. I don't feel like reading it. And so the reading wasn't, my reading wasn't, I'm reading this because it's important that you read that person. I was reading just because they were there. I mean, there's a thing called the African Writers Series.
Yes.
Which, what's the Heinemann used to do? My father had most of them. So Alex Laguma, Kantemba, Achebe, The Beautiful Ones Are Not Born, Ikwe Ama.
Yeah.
And he was like my father knew him. Because I think he lectured in Lesotho at some stage.
Yeah.
So these were just books that, when I'm looking for something to read, and I walk into my father's study and I'm like, you pull off, you look at the back. Am I in the mood for this today? There was no fanfare around it.
Yeah.
Maybe let me put it that way. So when I was in the poetry scene, it's just like, have you read this and have you read that? And it's like, Yeah, I tried to read that and I found it boring. But now you're being judged because
it's because you don't understand.
Yeah, if you're a poet,
you have a feeble mind. Sure. I think for me, the poetry scene then introduced me to writing. And I think I actually got into the poetry scene in terms of, I suppose, because when you're a student, when you're in early 20s, it's a hangout. I can't say that I was particularly interested in poetry, or deep writing. This is what kids do. You know what I mean? This is what we do. This is what kids with dreadlocks do. Okay, you go there and you hang out and you watch people do stuff, and then that's just what we did. But it sort of planted that writing seed, in my head. There's actually another way in which you can actually express yourself, apart from visuals. Because for me, I was starting to understand myself within graphic design, and I was always drawn towards, if a project had to do with human expression, I did better in that than I did with branding. You know what I mean? And I think one of the most important projects that I ever did that I enjoyed was in school it was a photography project, and it was called A Day in the Life of, right? Which is where for photography you would choose a subject, you would choose a person, and you would hang out with that person the whole day from sunrise to sunset, and you would put up a photo essay about that. And for me, it really changed so much of my understanding of what being a creative is. Because when you're doing graphic design, the understanding is that all of creativity is channeled towards selling a product. It's all commercial. Ultimately, what you're doing is that you're going to get a client who has to sell something to someone, and then you're going to put it in a particular package and then maximize their profits. And that's going to be that. And projects like that said to me, there's a way in which you can function as a creative that actually now immerses yourself in life itself. You know what I mean? And I remember it was one of the most profoundly interesting but terrifying experiences of my life. Okay, I'm going to cut it short, but this is something out of a movie, man. It's like, okay, I picked this guy. I'll keep it short. I picked this guy who he was a friend of mine from another faculty. He lived in Guguletu. He doesn't tell me where he lives, right? Or which part of it so it turns out he lives in this part that borders the Black Township and the Colored Township. He doesn't tell me that he lives in the Colored Township. Okay, this is important. This is not discriminatory. It's important for me to say this is where it was happening. So we get there, and it turns out we get to his place. It's like, okay, I need to walk with my brother somewhere. He wants to buy something. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Bring your camera. I'm like, okay, I'll bring my camera. So we go. And as we're walking, the demographic becomes increasingly more colored, and I'm like, okay, this is weird, but never mind. It's the hood. So we get to this house, and then he knocks on the door, and then the door opens this wide. Like, just an eye pops out. That's when I knew I'm in trouble. I'm like, okay, why is this guy opening the door like that? And they're like, they look, Vusumzi? And then they're pointing at me. I'm like, I'm just me. I'm just the guy, bruh. So they eventually they
just
open
the guy
it.
with a camera.
It's in my bag, right? I have a backpack. I have 2 cameras, okay? And all of them, they're not mine. I borrowed the one camera. The one is from school. That one is from my friend, and the other one I borrowed from the department. So we walk in there, and it's a small room. It's like a 2-roomed house, and it's full, right? I get there, there's a lot of people, and it's dead quiet. We get there, we sit down, and I can tell that we're being checked out, And then the one guy's like, hi, let's all right. Chill. I'm like, okay. And I'm like, oh, okay. As soon as that guy said that, everybody relaxes. They start taking out their tech pipes. I'm like, okay. I'm not sure where I am. I don't know what I'm supposed to do right now. right? And then where I'm sitting, it's across from one of the bedrooms. So the guy goes into the bedroom and then he opens the door and then there's a bed and there's a guy sitting on the bed and the bed is full of these little packets. I don't even know what I'm looking at. I'm like, okay, I'm in a crack house. Okay. And he's like, so the guy is like, this friend of mine, like, you want to take pictures? I'm like, nah. Trust me. He's like, I'm like,
He actually asked if you want to take pictures.
I'm like, no, I'm not taking pictures. He's like, why not? Because I don't have a camera. He's like, how you? I'm like, bruh, please. He's trying to get me killed. I sat in that room with the vapor just all over. I'm looking at the windowsill, and I think it was the one picture I wanted to take. So the room is like full of smoke. There's a window, there's a windowsill. Then there's a rat walking across the windowsill. And I was in conversation with this rat. And I'm like, bro, what you doing? How did you get here? I'm like, how did you get here? And the one guy I'm sitting next to, he's like, hi, money worry. Hey, and I'm like, okay, so the rat also does the stuff. He's like, yeah, that's why he's not running away. He's high. I'm like, huh, okay. I'm like, bro, can we go? You know? So we go. I'm like, I don't know what to do. He's like, okay, we're not going to leave now. We need weed. Because now we need to wash this thing down. I'm like, because everybody's smoking. You know, I'm like, they need to wash this thing down. I'm like, okay, where am I going to go? Okay, I can't go.
You don't know where you are.
I don't know where I am. Like, I'm like, okay, bro. He's like, do you want to come? I'm like, so as we're walking out, everybody starts arming. Okay, they start putting, I remember this one guy took a screwdriver that had like this handle made of sellotape and he puts it inside the sleeve of his jacket. And we walk, all of us. And this was like the scene out of, I don't know if you remember in Straight Out of, what is this? Straight Out of Compton.
Yeah.
When they walk out and then they sort of spread out in the streets, you know. So we walk out of this house and then we just fan out into the street. And I see people ducking, like they're getting out of the way. Everybody's just ducking. And I'm like, oh, I'm a part of these people. Okay. You know, everybody is like, yeah. So as we walk out the gate, we pass a danger box, you know, the electricity box. There's like bloody, like, yeah, so-and-so got stabbed here yesterday. By who? This guy. I mean, this guy that I'm walking next to. Yeah. Huh, okay. All right. So it was the most important photography project that never existed. I could not take a single picture that day, but I experienced this thing of being able to live outside of yourself and disappearing. I fell in love with documentary photography and documentaries in relation to me for the basis of just being able to disappear in a topic and not making yourself the thing. So that in many ways laid the foundation for all the other work that I did. I fell then into writing because I loved immersing myself into people's stories, you know. And that's even the podcast. That's how the podcast came about, because I just loved immersing myself into people's conversations, because I found, I don't know, man, I think it also had to do with when you don't have that a strong sense of identity, you don't feel the need to stand out. So I found that in this capacity to disappear, I felt very comfortable. And I could relate, even in that moment where it felt dangerous, I felt like I'm here, but I'm not here. And I remember being shocked at nobody paid any attention to me, but I'm here. You know, and people knew that I was here, but it didn't matter to me. And I think I remember at the time I was like, one of my ambitions was that I wanted to be a war photographer. At that point, I'm like, actually, I don't know, it hit some adrenaline in like living in danger.
You were in a war zone, just a different time.
Yeah.
What did you do after school?
Okay.
So you go, you study, you learn all of these things, and you discover your, you discover your inner Guevara.
Yes.
You discover all of these things about yourself, and then you come out of school, and then there's the real world.
So I got into the working world in a very strange way. And this relates to how I met George. So in my rebellion era, I was like, I did my fourth year. I wanted a degree because I knew that at one point I want to do a master's, I want to do a doctorate and whatever. So I did 4 years of graphic design. And my final project was a proposition for a TV show that focused on Black designers. And the show was called Blacks Can't Design. I felt it was ironic. I felt that it was interesting, and whatever, it was going to focus on all the, because there's a notion Blacks can't design. Yeah. So I was going to riff off of that and create this TV show and whatever. And I remember one day, one of my lecturers said, there's a crew here coming today to interview people for a new TV show on design. Do you want to, since you're doing research, don't you want to come and talk to them so they can give you some, pointers on how TV shows work and whatever? I'm like, okay, cool. So I went to campus and they were in one of the classes. And I remember I was hanging out and I was watching people auditioning for the show. And I talked to one of the producers. I'm like, I'm doing this project and whatever. I'm like, and then she was like, you can interview us on one condition, that you audition. I'm like, I remember the day I was wearing my Che Guevara t-shirt and I had these military pants. Okay, that's how militant I was. I was in my military fatigue that day. And they're like, we audition, then we ask you questions, you ask us questions. I'm like, okay, cool. And then I did the audition. A couple of weeks later, they're like, okay, you're in the show. And the show is called The Cut. And I'm like, okay. I remember it was December holidays at the time. I was at home. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to be on a TV show. So it's a TV show. It was hosted by she's my crush, and now I forgot. Anyway, so it was a whole thing. And I won the TV show, right? This reality show as a graphic designer, got to the finals and I won. And one of the prizes was a contract with Woolworths to work as a graphic designer in Woolworths, And it's one of the reasons why in my whole life I've ever only been to one interview for a job. So I got into that. And so I get into this TV show, I win it, I get a sense of publicity. I get a sense of what it's like to be in the public eye and whatever. And I realized I absolutely hate it. I hate being known. I hate, I found it very invasive. So I get into this space, and the opportunity that it allowed me to do was that I did not have to go through the traditional channels of graphic design, in that I didn't have to work in advertising. I didn't have to work through, the normal channels. I could work in this company, reputable. And I think at the time, Woolworths didn't have a creative department. It was just a handful of us. I remember it was myself and Brian, the one who's like my husband, Brian. It was me and him and two other graphic designers. And in many ways, going from varsity into that kind of a thing, institution, it helped me, it inculcated a certain level of creativity in me. That, okay, this is the level of design. So in many ways, I was never bad. It allowed me to navigate creativity through that. But at the same time, I realized that I needed outlets outside of making companies money. I needed to pursue other things outside. And because of that, I've always had side projects ever since then up until now. I can't not have, at any given moment, I'm busy with 3 or 4 projects of across different platforms.
You are listening to the Listen to Your Footsteps podcast, a podcast in which I chat to Africans from a cross-section of society and sectors including art, culture, design, business, and creativity, to name a few. We delve into their journeys, the decisions they have taken to get to where they are, how they do what they do, and everything in between. Essentially, we go wherever the spirit takes us. Now let's get back into the conversation. I mean, because you wrote for Marvin and you're writing quite prolifically, particularly around fatherhood.
Yes.
But I think when we first met, the only interview I've done for the cover of any type of publication was when you interviewed me. And I remember it always stood out because you took my love for cigars, and you took the process of a cigar being made and literally just like you mapped my life, or you mapped the stuff that I talked about, taking with the cigar making process as a backdrop. Were you still working then, or? Yes.
How I got to writing, shout out to George Machek. I was commenting a lot on the stuff that was written on it was Studio T3 before it became Marvin with George. And I think it was around about 2011 when George said, "Why don't you come write for us?" And I refused. And I'm like, "No, I'm not a writer. I'm just a creative. Why don't you get like journalists and stuff?" And George said something that in many ways became one of my defining principles in everything that I did. He said, sometimes not knowing how to do something is the reason why you can do it better than anyone. And it echoed something that one of my lecturers had said at the time, where I had a conversation with him and I said, "Why don't you work as a graphic designer anymore? Why are you just a lecturer?" And he says, "Because I know too many rules." He says, when you know a lot of rules, your canvas becomes very small because you know all the things that you're not supposed to do. And in that way, the capacity for you to create becomes very, very limited. So when you actually don't know the rules, your canvas is wider.
I actually saw, like a couple of days ago, I saw a LinkedIn post from somebody who's an editor. And they were saying they struggle to write creatively because they can't shut off the editor.
Yes.
Which is about, like you're saying, it's about the rules. It's about, they can look at somebody else's article and make it better and take into consideration these things. And she was saying for her to literally sit down and actually create the thing, he struggles in the same way that your lecturer was talking.
Yes. So for me, what became an integral part of me as a person, as a creative, was the process of constantly existing in between disciplines, right? So I fell in love with photography. I fell in love with writing. I fell in love with documentary photography. So, for example, if that article that I wrote, that piece that I wrote about you, I approached it as a documentary. I didn't approach it as a writer. I didn't approach it as a journalist. I'm like, what is Kojo interested? He's interested in cigars. Okay, let's create a visual around it. I write visually, like, okay, let's create a visual around it. Let's approach it like a photo essay, but in just words. You know what I mean? And for me, that has always been how I approach anything, like how I always want to mix disciplines, because I feel like that is how the thing is going to become different. With my podcast, I wanted to create an immersive experience. So one of the questions I asked myself is, how would a audio documentary sound like? Because I remember speaking earlier to Ayub, and I was saying that I didn't find, as much as I loved podcasts and stuff, I felt like for me, I wanted to edit the two-person talking thing differently. And I remember one of the moments that helped me understand better what it is that I want to do is when I came across audiobooks. And in particular, it was Malcolm Gladwell's Talking to Strangers, right? And I remember listening to it, and I was like, you can hear people talking. You can hear different perspectives. This is not a narrator reading the story. This is you're experiencing it. And I think even Power FM at the time had very, very interesting documentaries. And I'm like, that's what I want to do. I want to take this 2-person conversation and I want to create like an immersive experience in it. And I'm going to approach it as a sound designer, not as a podcaster.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, okay, how then do we do that? I would watch movies without looking, with the screen off. And like, okay, this is how you set a scene. This is how you do. This is how you work with sound. I studied sound design a lot. I researched sound design. Okay, this is how you create a scene. This is how you know. Because for me, I was like, there's no point in making things that sound like everyone else's thing, And I think it was also part of the reason why my podcast never had visuals. It also had to do with a lot of I've struggled since childhood with visibility. I grew up with, I don't know if this is an actual term, but I grew up as an invisible child. And you grow up, you just so happen to not have a dominant personality. You have a lot of siblings and everybody takes up the parenting bandwidth. Everybody, you always have a sibling who has bigger problems or bigger dreams or a bigger this or a bigger voice. They just, they just take up everything. They take up all the space. And there's you, in your little corner, you never really cause trouble. You're quiet by nature. You pass decently at school. There's never anything about you to discuss. People kind of forget that you're there. And I share this because last week I told my mom that, hey, I wrote a book. And her reaction was, when you have a toddler, right? And they say, Dad, watch this. And then they do this weird move where they tumble and then they do this thing, then they spin, then they wiggle around, and then they stand up, they're like, yeah. And you're like, okay, good for you. So I'm like, Mom, I wrote the book. She's like, okay, whatever that means, good for you, because she doesn't know me. And when I share the story, people are like, oh, your mom didn't love you. I'm like, no, it's not that. It was, with parenting, ultimately, these are people. It's not it's not an owner and their pet.
Sure.
These are 2 people. And there are certain, when 2 people come together, their relationship is the thing, like 2 chemicals. Their relationship is that chemical reaction. And there are parents and sibling relationships that create certain kind of chemical reactions. And then some that just don't, you know what I mean? When you have a certain kind of personality that doesn't clash, you like sugar in water. You're there, but you just disappear into the mix. Yeah. Whereas other people, they're like coffee, you put it in the water and it just takes up everything. You know what I mean? So it wasn't that they didn't, they were people of their time, you know what I mean? But I just happened to have the kind of personality that I wasn't there, And when you have that kind of situation, parents never get to know you, like, I remember when I was telling my mom, she can't for the life of me imagine what it is I would have to write about. Like, what is it you have to talk about? Like, you're just quiet. Like, what is it that is so intense you even wrote a book? Like, the idea of the topic itself is just alien. Like, you wrote about what? Spirituality. What do you know about spiritual culture? You. What, bro? Like, when did this happen? You know what I mean? So I took a long time sort of struggling with that idea of, I struggle with visibility. This is why I remember for the first year of my podcast, there was no pictures of me anywhere. If you were to listen to my podcast, I introduced myself at the end when I'm signing off because I didn't want people to know that it was me. I didn't want people to see that it was me, So when you grow up as an invisible child, you sort of struggle with visibility as an adult, which for me is part of what is sort of daunting about the whole book thing. And, they're planning, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. You're going to have to be in front of people, Like, I remember I was so daunted by that. I literally went back to therapy, like in preparation for the book coming, because I was like, I will not be able to handle standing in front of people talking about me. I can tell you all sorts of stories in all different manners. I can do photography documentaries. I can do audio documentaries. I can do visual storytelling. I can do a lot of things, but please don't ask me to talk about me or anything about me or ask me to stand in front of people. That is, I can't do that, but it's interesting that when you have work that you have to do, and that's what it calls for, that's just what you do.
No, you'll find your way through it. Thank you.
I hope.
I mean, look at you. You're fine now. You started off and you're like, this is weird, and now, But that idea of invisibility. Well, first of all, just in terms of what you're saying in terms of relationships, particularly within family, and I think sometimes we realize as we grow older that the people closest to us, as in blood family, often probably know the least about us, especially with parents, especially when you start to leave, because you then have a life. You have a life that excludes them. And unless you have the kind of relationship where you're going to sit and talk about the stuff, all of a sudden you're off at varsity for a year, and then you come back. Unless you have, a family that talks, everything that's happened over the year, like your development, your changing perspectives, they don't see that.
No.
And vice versa. It's like also realizing that your parents are like human beings, just like you, who have gone through their own journeys and their own experiences, and they're trying to figure it out. We're all trying to figure it out. But how has that impacted on you as a father?
Sure. It has made me. Sometimes I used to think that I'm obsessively a father. I think, especially with my son. I spent a couple of years as a single father, and it forced me to pay a lot of attention. I'm a very, very, I don't want to say thinking. I overthink parenting. I overthink parenting in many ways. Because I didn't want to repeat, the mistakes that my father, But over time, I also learned that I can't correct my upbringing through my son, mainly because I am not my father and my son is not me. Me and my son are two completely different people, and me and my father are two completely different people, So in then sort of maintaining or allowing your children to be seen has been challenging, because me being seen and my child being seen are also not the same thing. You know what I mean? I was a creative from a very young age, but I didn't know that, because no one really paid much attention to it. And if you're a child and your parent doesn't acknowledge the things that you do, you don't realize that these things are things that you're doing, or that there's anything to it. You know what I mean? If you're a child, for example, who can paint nicely, but no one ever says anything about it, you will never consider yourself an artist. You know what I mean? You just say, no, I can draw, I used to do this, but you don't think of it as a thing, So in the counterbalance to that, the mistakes that I made as a father, especially with my son, is that then I made everything a thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I want to do this. Let's get into it. You know what I mean? I remember he was interested in beads. He wanted to make like beads, like weird things like market days in primary school. Let's start a business. I'll get you start a business. And I remember this one day with tears in his eyes, when I was forcing him, like, no, we need to do like boot sales and stuff. And he's like, I didn't say I want to do it as a business. I just said I like beats.
Like, dude.
That's all I said to you. I didn't say I want to do this thing as a job. I just said I like beads. Bracelets are cool. Okay, that's all I said to you. Now you have a room full of bees, and then this, you have prices. You have me standing in taxi rank. Beads.
I feel his pain.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I made everything into a thing too much, you know, where whatever interest we're in there. Like whatever you're doing, I'm in there. Let's do it, you know. And I think it's something I've had to rehab out of myself, even recently, you know, when I realized that he plays basketball now. I'm like, dude, you're literally the only parent here all the time. Okay. And I remember the one day they were saying like, he's going to go somewhere and play. And he's like, you can't come. Like, but I thought, no. I thought cool dads show up for their kids. They do this for their kids. No, don't come. It's okay. Because I really like you're making a thing out of it. So now the only way I can make it to games is if I bring my camera. So then they get shots, they get content for the Instagram and whatever.
That's it. Look, it's an interesting one because so I didn't get that obsessive, but I've tried to support and then been disappointed.
That disappointment hurts.
So
it hurts.
it's like do the sport and then I spend everything and then you stop doing it and then you do the next one and then you stop doing it. And with my son, I was at everything after the age of like 5, because before I worked. With my daughter, I have tried to be because she saw me doing the same for her brother. But actually right now, like on the weekend, he was playing a netball match and he was like, are you going to come? I was like, hey, dude, like I have to take your brother to an open day. And then today, nobody knows when we're recording, but today she has a netball match and I was like, I don't know if I can come because I've got a recording today. And that's the first, this week, literally the last 5 days, the first time where I've had to say that. But I don't, it's like I go to support, but I also don't make it a thing, if that makes sense. Like I was doing hockey, and then she wanted to go outside. I helped her find the place. I pay for the thing, obviously. I drive. If there's a hockey match, at 8 o'clock and you have to be on the other side of the city, it's in my diary. I wake up and I'll take you. I'll give pointers, but I learned with my son not to be overbearing with it. So, it's also, I used to be a sports person. I used to be an athlete. So my big thing is, okay, if you want to do this thing, then there's a certain element of discipline that you need. Where when you don't want to do it, like when I was a sprinter, and I know enough times I didn't want to train. But because this is your training schedule, you get up and you go and you do it, whether you like it or not. But yeah, it's also you talk about you and your father, 2 individuals, you and your son, 2 individuals. It's also a very different environment.
Yes.
And when I was writing my book, the biggest epiphany I had was I left a job because I was never available for my family. And I was living a parallel life to my family. And then one day I woke up, not long after COVID, or actually during kind of COVID and the lockdowns and openings up, and I realized that sometimes being present too much is also a problem. So I went from not being available to just always being there. Pick up from school, drop off at school, all sports stuff. Like my children could not get away from me.
Yeah.
I guess it's learning that balance.
Yes, and it's a strange thing for people who don't have kids to sort of grasp that you can be too much too there.
Yeah.
For kids, because you as a person who was a child, you forget that as a child you also wanted your space. You know, because also we are growing up in a culture that's hyper focused on parenting. You know, there's all woke parenting, soft parenting, gentle parenting, this kind of parenting. You know, we have all these TikTok parenting things that say be there all the time, that the only way you can parent is to be there all the time. And it's a thing that I struggle with even now, you know, especially in the age of technology and tablets and phones and things like that, where, you know, am I spending enough time with my kids? You know, are we doing enough together? Are we, you know, am I there for my daughter enough? You know, she's gonna go look for me somewhere else. Is she gonna, you know,
Yeah.
you overthink these things, and I think you forget that kids are people.
Yeah.
You know, kids are people, and they're also having their own experience. You know, but I know that I have not found a balance. I am in many ways still very insecure as a father. I do feel like I'm not confident as much as I would like to be. Whether that means that my kids are not okay is a different thing, you know, because I have particular standards for, okay, this is what, you know, we should be doing, this is what, for example, I'm a creative, you know, my kids are not necessarily creative, you know, maybe my daughter is, you know, maybe not, I don't know, you know, so I always have to pull myself back to say, when you expect your kids to be doing this, why do you expect them to be doing that? If you say, okay, kids must now should be doing this, why are you expecting them to be doing that? Because, you know, I'm like, we should be drawing, we should be doing this, we should be doing that, we should be doing something engaging. Why that particular thing, you know?
How old are they now?
It's 16 and 7. 16 and 7. So what has helped is finding ways of connecting with each one within their own space. You know what I mean? Like, my son plays basketball. I've tried to learn. I used to play basketball much younger. I tried to learn as much as I can about basketball, and, you know, we do some trainings together. And with my daughter, yesterday I showed her the book. The book made it onto the homebrew list. So I show her the thing, and she's like, "Papa, that's you in the book. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna write a book. I'm gonna write a book, and I'm gonna have writer clothes." I'm like, what are writer clothes? She's like, when you dress in a turtleneck and glasses. I'm like, okay, all right, you know. So I've realized the best thing I can do is to spend more time responding than dictating. You know, you respond to where they are at that particular time. You know, like when my son was playing soccer, I was like, Ronaldo, Baba, Messi, that's you. All the way we were going. And then when he quit, I was crushed. And for him, it was like, nah, I don't want to do that anymore. And as you're saying, you sort of have to pull yourself back.
I mean, I always say that if we're privileged to be in a position to be able to let them find their thing,
yeah.
But to find their thing, they have to go through multiple things. For a while, my only rule was that if you start at the beginning of the year, you have to complete it for the year. End of the year, basically when it was school tide. End of the year, if you decide you don't want to do it anymore, cool. And so I have drum kit in storage. I have a keyboard stacked up in a room. There's guitars. There's football boots.
There's all your money.
There's all of these things.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I mean, like with my daughter, like I started roller skating. My daughter liked roller skating. She wanted to go roller skating. Like, okay, I took her and it was just the two of us. And she's like, dude, you're going to have to skate.
Wow.
And this is like, what, 3 years ago? And I had to skate and discovered that I really, really enjoy it.
Really?
Yeah.
That's so cool.
And I also discovered that it's the one place, because I'm very deliberate or very conscious of how I move through spaces. When you're learning how to roller skate, you are going to look foolish. There's no ways about it.
Yeah.
And even as you get comfortable, like, I mean, we haven't been in a while, and I bought skates and stuff, and I'm like, dude, when are we going skating? He's not in the mood for skating. But I also feel like it's a like a little microcosm for kind of human nature. When you see people, because at the skating rink you're going around one way, and then you're seeing the people going the other way, especially kids, or not being conscious of the people around them and then bumping or taking up space. And it's like you kind of get a sense of how they view the world. And with kids, how, what home is like and how they're raised and, all of those things. But when you're on a roller skate, and even before you fall, you get that moment where the one slips and you try and get the balance, your facial expression, everything about you
it's gone.
Is gone. And I had to learn how to be okay with that.
With looking like a meme.
Yeah. Literally I had to learn how to be okay with it. And I found that I enjoyed it. But now she's not. But yeah, I mean, it is about helping them find their thing.
Yes.
At the same time, ensuring that they know that when you commit to something, there needs to be some level of follow through, which is why my whole thing was, well, if you're going to do the thing. So the latest is my daughter was doing hockey, and then I bought, after like a year or 7-8 months, like I bought the better hockey stick and the shoes and this. And now she's not doing hockey. And I'm like, dude, I'm going to sell that stuff. She's like, no, I'm going to go back. Hey, sharp, as long as you're going to go back. Otherwise, I can sell it. I can recoup some of my costs.
Get my money back.
I can recoup some of my costs. So the book, as we kind of wind down, so the podcast is coming back.
The podcast is coming back. The podcast has been offline for almost 15 months. Disappeared. It was a hard decision, but it had to be done. I got to the point where I realized I couldn't write the book and do the podcast because, when you do the podcast, everything yourself, it becomes time consuming. But one of the things about it was whenever I had to write a chapter, I'm like, is this a chapter? Is this an episode? Like I could never differentiate. Like, am I researching in the next episode? Because my podcast is heavily research based. Yeah. It's heavy. I spent weeks researching topics, even before I interview people, because my topics are not personal stories. We're talking about history, we're talking about a lot of things. There's a lot of context that I want to understand before I engage on the topic. And yeah, there just came a time when I realized, like, okay, I have to pick one. But the thing that was scary for me was, I was like, podcasting is a fast moving industry, because whether I like it or not, it does fall under content creation, and content creation is like this continuous beast that you have to keep feeding all the time, to keep your metrics up, to keep your numbers up. But I was like, ultimately, this book might live longer than the podcasts. Who knows? The internet could crash one day. You know what I mean? And I've always wanted a way in which I could distill, what it is that I was learning into something that does not exist on the internet. It's something that can exist. People can engage with differently. It presented a very different challenge in my process. It also challenged my writing as well, because now I can't necessarily write with flair because now I'm talking about history. I'm not talking about personal stories. I'm trying to create a body of work of knowledge, and I think the book is really about how we got to our understanding of spirituality. It's not a self-help book. It's not, you have to do this, you have to do that. It's like, why do you believe the things that you believe? How did we get to believe the things? If we believe in ancestors, how did we get to that? When you believe ancestors are this and this, what was the historical process of us getting to that? And I think the fundamental way in which the book is different to the podcast is that the book is not based on interviews. The book is solely based on academic research, which was not what the publisher had asked for. The manuscript I had proposed is not what they got in the end, and it became a very important aspect of it, in that I was going to interview people. I was like, okay, now I'm going to interview people, we're going to talk about topics, and I'll write it down. I'm going to say, this is what I learned. And then the very first person that I approached to interview with this regard, this was someone very, very influential within the spirituality space, someone who's very, very, very well known. And I had the conversation with them about, this is a topic and whatever. And in a very sly, underhanded way, the person basically said that you have no right to write this book. You have no right to have this podcast in the first place. You're not knowledgeable enough. You're not articulate enough. You're not worthy of being in this space. What hit me hard about that particular moment was, this was someone I had interviewed for my podcast. Someone I really respected, and someone who's respected by a lot of people. And also they happen to be like a connector. This is a person who has connected me with a lot of people. And when they said this, it sort of, I felt just the energy leave my body when I was like, so this is what this person actually thinks of me. And now, because they're so influential, is this what everyone thinks in this circle? Do people vele not think that I belong here? Are they then going to say, if it wasn't for us, you wouldn't have this book? You took our knowledge and you put it in the book and you are selling it, and you are now posing yourself as this knowledgeable person. This is what I had this. And it absolutely crushed me. It absolutely crushed me. And because, when someone affirms your fear, when someone affirms your insecurity, when you're like overweight.
It's like, well, it's like somebody, you're experiencing imposter syndrome, and somebody goes, Vele, you're an imposter.
A horrible one, a blatant one. If you're overweight, someone, hey, bro, you're fat. Like, it literally pushed me and all of my insecurities over the cliff, because then I was like, okay, what am I going to do now? Does this mean I have to write this book myself, as me? Yes, that's what you're going to do. Where am I going to get the information from? You're going to do the thing that you love doing. You're going to research. You're going to read books. You're going to read doctorates. You're going to read PhD papers. You're going to read masters. You're going to read, you know what I mean? This is what you're going to do. But this person's voice just kept echoing and echoing in my head. You shouldn't be doing this. I remember, because when you're working and you're writing, you have to do these weird odd hours, wake up at 4, I start writing at 4 a.m., when before you do the drop-offs and stuff. And then you'll start again at like 9 p.m. and everybody goes to bed, you'll write till midnight and whatever. And this, those lonely hours and this person's head voice is just echoing. And I remember saying to myself, you do know that this person probably even forgot that they said this to you. This is you now owning this voice. This is just you saying this to yourself. And I remember listening to it over and over and over and over again. And I was like, okay, this book is not good enough. Yes, it's not good enough. Why? Then I started paying attention. I'm like, okay, let's talk about it. Why not? Well, it's because this chapter is not researched properly. I'm like, okay, how would you do it? Okay, here's what I would do. I would find you need this kind of a perspective. You need this kind of an angle. And you need this kind of a structure. I'm like, oh, okay. Then, next time it comes back, this book is not good enough. Why? Okay, well, this chapter is, this is what's wrong with it. It's not, does have this, the way you wrote this paragraph, what's wrong with the paragraph? The paragraph doesn't actually say the thing you actually muddled. It's not clear enough. Like, okay, how, you know what I mean? And then that voice became my coach. You know what I mean? It became like, drop and give me 10 push-ups.
Well, you talk about African spirituality. I believe we are at every moment where we're supposed to be doing what we're supposed to. When you said that person said that to you, I can imagine it crushing you. But I heard not a challenge, because a challenge feels confrontational. But to a certain extent, it was a challenge to take the next step. That's what I heard when you describe it. What I heard when you describe it is, the person's like, who are you? You're not supposed to be the person who has this podcast. You're not the person supposed to be writing this thing. But they've engaged with you and they've connected you. And now, okay, you're going to do a book. And I'm hearing the way you've done the podcast. The podcast is a good start, but it's not the end point. In terms of your journey, in terms of your spiritual journey, in terms of your knowledge journey, etc. So in a way, it feels like to me, just working on intuition, that this person was saying, okay, you've started well. And the fact that they connected you and the fact that these other people came and had conversations with you means there's something there.
Yes.
They wouldn't do it for somebody who was just an absolute fraud. But I was like, okay, now if you're going to do a book, Chief, you can't do the book the way you did the podcast.
That was a hard realization.
So that person basically challenged you.
Yes.
That voice, like you're saying, it became the coach. It became the channel to, in what today speak, level up. Because you had to level up. You couldn't approach the two the same way.
It's weird that you're saying that with so much confidence, because I didn't realize that until that time. Like, for me, I thought it was literally going to be the exact same thing. It was going to be the written version of the podcast. Like is it Tim Ferriss? You know what I mean? Who it's all the same.
Yeah, the Tool of Titans.
Yeah. It's literally all the same thing. You know what I mean? I didn't understand that the book by its nature was going to be a different thing, that it was going to be a different process, and that it was going to ask something else of me. Like I did not see that at all. And it made me fight for the longest time.
But it's recognizing, I guess it's also because the book was something new for you. Because if I tell you to go and make photographs for the podcast, in terms of interpret the essence of the podcast, go out into the world and make pictures, I am relatively confident that you would go out and do it in the way that it needed to be done. you leave yourself open to, okay, in making these images, this is what this medium needs. And not going, okay, this is how this medium is structured as a podcast. So therefore, when I go and take photographs, it needs to be overt. Like the connection, the thread needs to be overt. Whereas it sounds like you were, and I get it with Tim Ferriss in particular and Tools of Titans, because I have thought about it.
Yes.
Right? But even that book, the way he structured it, it wasn't just a transplantation of a podcast.
Yes.
Because he also pulled certain things out, and it's, okay, what do you pull out? What do you put in? What do you take out?
Yes.
So it's allowing that medium or that kind of project or that entity to tell you how it needs to come and being open to it. And I guarantee, like, it feels like if that person hadn't said that to you and jolted you and undressed you in such a brutal and blunt fashion, you would have probably taken the easy way out and just put something up.
Yes. So it ended up going down the most difficult way it could go down, because now, like I said, it's all academic research, and I'm not an academic. Now I have to learn how to research like an academic. And now I have to, and in many ways, there's nothing creative. I'm a creative, you know what I mean? And I have to say that in many, many ways, there's nothing creative about this book. You know, it is not creative in the way that I would think that this is a creative.
I beg to differ, because I believe creativity takes many forms.
It does, but I had to let go of my understanding of creativity. Even writing, I had to let go. I'm like, okay, I like writing like this. You know, it's very like, but that's not the place for that here, because this, you can't write in a way that can be timed. It has to have like a timeless thing to it. Yeah. It has to exist far beyond this time, you know. So I can't use weird pop culture references that no one is going to get 20 years from now. You know what I mean? So yeah, so that's what the book is about. It's coming out next month, and yeah, I was saying to my son, I'm like, okay, I have to develop an alter ego to push this product, this project, because what is asking of me is not me. That person who's going to have to stand and do interviews and do that, that's not, I'm going to have to, I remember I still want to go watch Sinners. I was watching Michael B. Jordan, and I was like, you see, this is what I have to do. There's going to be that guy and there's going to be that guy. Same person, but different. Because I just want to sit at home and do my projects and be in my workshop and tinker away. The person who has to be on stages and orate and talk and be interviewed, that's somebody else. He can handle that. So I sort of have to split myself into two. So I'm like, maybe I'll even have different expressions. Maybe you'll see it in the glint of my eye, like that's someone else.
That's the reason why when I started poetry, I used to be Monster as a poet.
You see,
because
it needs someone else, right?
Because I'm not as, I wasn't, especially then. I'm a bit better now, not as comfortable on stage in front of people.
Yes,
but thank you very much.
Much appreciated.
It's the first step in you're getting yourself out there. I want to leave you with a parting thought.
Please.
When you were just describing kind of the academic, like the academicness and the things you had to learn with the book, you said earlier on you did 4 years for your degree.
Yes.
Because you wanted to maybe look at
doing a master's.
Doing a master's, maybe a PhD down the line.
Yes.
And the universe or the ancestors, whoever you believe in, now you've had to learn how to think academically to write the book, which is the foundation for going eventually down the line, waking up one day and deciding you're going to do a master's So and later you're going to do a PhD.
Right.
That's the thread I saw. And that's my parting thought for you.
I'm taking it. I'm running with it. Thank you, bro.
Thanks, my man.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for listening to this conversation. Please leave a review and subscribe. Check out the show notes for links to the guest, the podcast, and myself. I hope you enjoyed listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed having it.